Welcome to Young America, everybody. My name is Jacob, and today I'm with Joe, and we are starting on a new adventure with our new series on historical figures and how they can impact our lives. And today we're going to be starting with George Washington and going through some of the facts of his growing up and his life, and then how we can apply what he learned to ourselves today. So let's just jump right into it. Starting at the very beginning, Joe. So I mean, obviously, we didn't live back in 1700s when George Washington was alive. So, what was his childhood like? Where did he grow up?
Well, his childhood, based off of what we know from
Yeah,
what others have said. Um, Obviously, he was born and raised in Virginia, and basically he just worked with his dad on a farm, and it was called the Fairy Farm. And we were just like having a discussion whether it was like an actual fairy farm or was it called the Fairy Farm. But we've come to the conclusion that is not a fairy farm. It is just called Fairy Farm. So there you go. If you're
hmm
thoroughly confused, join the club. But then his father died when Washington was at the age of 11. So obviously, at that point in time, Washington took over, I guess, as the man of the
Head of
house,
the
if you
family.
will,
Yeah.
or whatever, how that works. Yeah. So from an early age, he learned responsibility. And I think that's a good thing, you know, especially for men or for young boys to learn responsibility, even when they're young. I think it's very beneficial for them and it'll help them out in the long run. But yeah, so that's basically not much else is known about, his childhood, really. So,
Yeah. So that being said, okay, so his father died when he was 11, and he kind of was the one who had to be responsible for his family now. So what did that look like then for his education? Because I would think it would be kind of hard to go to school. You run
yeah,
a
so for
show.
his education, he from what it sounds like he was educated by a tutor. It sounds like the family was pretty wealthy, and so that's what the wealthy people did was to get private tutors to come in and teach their kids. And so which actually kind of surprised me that they were wealthy. I don't know why I thought they weren't, but I just never thought they were wealthy, but I guess they are.
Learn
But
something new every day.
anyways, yeah, right. He basically just got tutored from home, and he got done with school. I think he was at the age of 15, and so yeah, pretty smart cookie, I guess.
Well, I mean, that was a question, and I don't know if you have the answer to this, but like, it makes me wonder how, compared to today, what, how educated, so to speak, he was. Are we talking high school level? Are
Well,
we talking college? Like, what are we looking at here? Do we know that?
yeah, so I think it's more of a college level, honestly. Now, they obviously didn't have like science and the history stuff because obviously histories they haven't gone through all the stuff we've gone through and they haven't figured out all the stuff from science that we've figured out yet. So, as far as that part goes, I don't think there's much,
Yeah, not as in
other
depth,
than
maybe.
what was there.
Yeah.
But I do think that there were a lot of other things that like mathematics they were really good at, learning different languages like Greek and Hebrew and just things that 15-year-olds should really wouldn't know today. They
hmm
were intelligent.
Maybe more classically educated than we would consider today, maybe.
Hmm.
But at any rate, so all right, he finishes school when he's 15. So what did he do after that? I mean, considering us, that's pretty young. I mean, we don't graduate
Yeah,
college till we're like what, 22 if we start early or whatever. So
yeah. Well, he after he got done with college, or not college, school, whatever you want to call
mhm.
it, he figured out that he was pretty good with numbers, and so he went into surveying,
Yeah.
and he did that for a while. But then he and his stepbrother started to travel the world, or at least travel, outside of America. And um, his half brother had tuberculosis, and so they thought that the warmer weather would help with that. And anywho, but uh, as soon as they left or whatever, they George Washington got smallpox, and because of that, I mean, most of the times he would have died from that, especially back then. But he survived, but because of that, he had like a bunch of scars all over his face. But
Mm,
anywho, his brother was he studied abroad, so I think he studied in England, and so he knew more. So because in America they're just starting and they may not have all
yeah,
the stuff that
don't have the
you know,
infrastructure.
and they're also still learning stuff probably more so than America is, and so all the new stuff that they haven't learned yet is hasn't come across the ocean,
Hmm.
whatever. But anyways, his older brother's name was Lawrence, and so Lawrence was also kind of tutoring Washington at the same time, so he learned a lot from his older brother. But uh, his older brother died the next year, and but because of that, he left Washington Mount Vernon, and we all know Mount Vernon is
Okay, right.
famous with Washington, so
Yeah. Have you ever
that's how
been
we
there?
got Mount Vernon.
It's cool.
I want to say I have, but I honestly don't remember.
All the
Like
places
I've
you've
been
been.
so many places, I'm like I don't remember anymore.
Well, you can start a new adventure then. So,
Yeah.
okay. Washington hung out with his brother Lawrence until his brother died, it sounds like. And then what happened after that? Like, what did he do after he got done living in England and for a while?
Yeah. So in December of 1752, he was made the commander of the Virginia military or militia. And it wasn't like the whole thing, it was just like a specific part of the
Like,
militia.
okay.
And they fought in the French and Indian War. And then after the French and Indian War, he became head of the entire militia. And then after that, he resigned in 1759 to, which is which is funny because like his whole plan was just to live at Mount Vernon and grow his farm, go horseback riding,
Hmm.
live life a little bit. That was
Yeah.
his whole plan. But he's like, nope, that's not going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah, that is interesting. It's like people who want to, sometimes things get thrust on you, I guess. I don't know. It's like
Yeah.
that just makes me want to think
Well, I mean, when
Washington
you're
was kind of a normal guy. When you think, in a way, he just wanted to go do his thing, but it didn't happen, obviously. So
yeah,
it's just interesting.
well, when you're as smart and as useful as Washington was, like, hey, this guy's actually he knows what he's doing, so let's
Hmm.
plug him into something, something
Yeah.
useful. He can help us all out.
Yeah.
But
I mean, I would
whatever.
guess too, he probably was cared. Sometimes normal people actually care. You know what I mean? Like,
Oh yeah.
he
Well, he kind of reminds me of Trump,
volunteered for things.
honestly,
Yeah, or
in a way, because I was saying he kind of reminds me of Trump in a way because he actually cared. He could have
hmm.
just said no to everything and just stayed at his own house. And you look at the things that Trump have said, and they're not the same people, but the likeness is there.
Yeah.
um, Trump could have totally just continued making billions and nobody would have cared. But he's like, you know what? I can make a difference and I can change America and I can make it great again. And so that's what he did.
Hmm.
And now, because he's done that, everyone's climbing down his back and trying to get rid of him. And he's like,
Yeah.
he didn't have to go through any of this stuff. He could have just
Mm.
done whatever he wanted to.
Stayed quiet.
But he's like, yeah.
Hmm.
But so in that way, it's kind of the same. But
Yeah.
other than that, not really.
Yeah. So back to Washington. After he gets done with the Virginia militia and the French and Indian War, what happens after that? Where did he go from there?
So he goes back home, which he's been longing for, and he gets himself into politics. And so,
Oops.
he's a good politician. Yeah, right. Big mistake. But he finds a wife, and her name's obviously Martha. And so she was actually a wealthy widow who had some kids, and they got married, but they never had kids of their own. They never had kids of their own. But Washington, he took those kids and he treated them like his own, and he loved them just as much. But so yeah, that's basically what happened. You know.
Yeah. So then, all right, he gets into politics, and eventually we know he gets involved in the Revolutionary War and the politics there.
Mhm.
So what kind of led to that involvement there?
Yeah. So Washington was obviously he was paying attention to politics because he was a politician or whatever. So with the taxing, which is funny, but um, they were freaking out about like a 2% tax or whatever, and
Hmm.
now today there's a 40% tax, and what are we doing? We're doing
Nothing.
nothing. But that's beside the point. Um, Anyways, so he's watching this and he's like, you know what? We need to separate from England. And so obviously we all had that mentality, or at least most of us, anyways. And anyways, uh, they had the first Continental Congress, then they had the second one. And at the second Continental Congress, he was appointed commander in chief of the army. And so, because of his unique leadership, I believe we were able to win the war. And I mean, obviously with God's help, but God used specific people like him to win the war.
Hmm.
And it's really crazy to think about a bunch of farmers and people that don't really know how to do nothing, and we whipped up on the biggest army in the world, and it's just so miraculous. It's like holy cow.
Hmm.
But if you look at history from a biblical perspective, you'll find out that God had a purpose for America, and I believe He still does. Um, and He used people like Washington because he had Washington and people like him had morals. They had standards, and they were
Hmm.
willing to die for them. That's why we went to war, because we were not willing to be treated like a bunch of dogs when we were citizens of England. And
Yeah.
you know
Hmm.
they stood up for what was right, and that's something that we don't have today. Um, but
Yeah.
anyways, it's all about character and it's all about morals.
Yeah.
What morals do you have? What character do you have? And it doesn't matter what you're doing. It doesn't matter if you're a politician or just a guy that wants to live on his farm. You should still have morals.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree. Here's a question that I was thinking as you were talking. So, what kind of traits do you think made Washington's leadership unique and maybe are things that we could emulate today, even as, young men specifically?
Hmm. Well, I believe he had a pure heart, and I believe we can see that through his willingness to serve his country. And honestly, it wasn't even a country yet; it was in the making of a country. But he was willing to take that sacrifice and willing to lay everything down to die, and basically what I was just saying, to stand for the principles. And I
Hmm.
believe that's where it all comes down to is it doesn't matter necessarily what you're doing. I mean, it does, but just in general,
Yeah,
it doesn't
yeah.
matter what you're doing. As long as you have principles that are godly. And we look at how America was founded and what documents and things were drafted when the pilgrims first landed, and the Declaration of Independence and all of this stuff. And God is incorporated in all of it. And I believe that is the most important thing, is that he read the Bible and he loved God. And I believe because of that, he learned many principles and he learned many things that are in the Bible, and which is why we should read the Bible constantly every day to learn and pick out these things. I mean, if you just look through um, all of the men in the Bible and just look at their character and look at the outcome of them, you
Hmm.
can learn so much. Like, you look at David, you look at Samuel, you look at Samson, you look at all these people, and the list can go on forever.
Yeah.
But they chose a certain way of life, and because of that, the outcome was whatever it was. So you can either do wrong and get treated, you know,
Get what you deserve.
how you're supposed to. Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say. Get what you deserve for it, or you can live right and you can prosper, and God will bless you. And I
Hmm.
believe that was the biggest thing that helped George Washington. Um, and just another thing, real quick, is um, in the Valley or the Valley Forge. Um, I believe it should be. Oh, quiet. Um, in the Valley Forge, he's Washington is known for that picture of him kneeling and the snow melting around him, and that is a true story. And it's not just a picture; it actually happened. And there's stories of his men, telling that story again and how he was committed to God. You know how much time that would take for the snow around you to melt just to be down on your knees and praying to God? That's going to take a lot of time. And
Hmm.
he was dedicated to God. I mean, he was, I'm, he was away from the fire. He probably didn't have anything. He was just kneeling there. So he was probably shivering. I mean, he was cold. I bet.
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
imagine. But he was committed to God. He was committed to winning the war, and that's what set him apart from everyone else, I believe. Because normally the generals or the commanders, officers, whatever you want to call them, they would go and leave their soldiers wherever, and they'd go to their houses or they'd go to some place that's nice and cozy. But George Washington, he didn't do that. He stayed there with his men. He suffered with his men, and he gained a lot of respect for that. And I believe
Hmm.
that's why they elected him as president, because they knew that he cared about people.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So commitment is a key part. I like that. Or because just to pull out something, is like obviously relationship with God and then commitment are keys that made Washington what he was. That's what it sounds like. So yeah, that's good.
Hmm.
So then the question would be, you know, we live in America now, so we know Washington eventually won the war. But what happened to Washington after he won the war?
Well, he went back home, but
Whoa.
he didn't get to stay. He didn't get to stay there. Um, so he was so influential in the Continental Congress and obviously winning the war as general that many of the people wanted him as the first president to, you know, run the country. And at first, he had nothing to do with it. He's like, no, just leave me alone. I want to stay home. I want to live my life. Just please leave me alone. But later, he was convinced that, hey, maybe I should, do this. So obviously, he did become the first president. And he made a ton of changes. Well, not changes, but instated a whole bunch of new things that were
Hmm.
very beneficial for the founding of our country. Uh, but yeah, he got elected for the first term and then obviously for the second term as well. But here are just some accomplishments that he, had done. Let me read them real quick. Da, 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 da. So first of all, he had diplomatic relations, which was, I believe, somewhat of a newer thing in a sense. Um, Obviously, because there was France and England and all that stuff. There was
Hmm.
still war going on between everyone, but the ability to have relationships with all of them was quite
Yeah.
profound because we had just gotten done with beating the snot out of them, but you're like, hey, we should be allies.
Hmm.
um but
See how
anyways,
that
there was
went in the
that
War
one,
of
and then
1812, but
um
it worked then.
yeah, And then they had the Supreme Court back then. They had the National Bank. They had presidential cabinet. He passed a whiskey tax. So basically, it is what it sounds like. Yeah, a tax on whiskey. And what's another thing? He had biblical standards, like taxing whiskey. I mean, he didn't necessarily get rid of it, but if you tax it, the likelihood of people, actually going to
Right,
buy
it
it
goes
is
down. Yeah.
less. But right, and so you jack that tax up pretty high. That it deters people, and it works. But and then obviously the Bill of Rights, and then five new colonies joined the Union while he was president. But anyways, at the end of his second term, he he's like, no, I'm done, and he was done. He finally got to go home. Um, but yeah, so he could have he easily could have become the king or monarchy like England was,
Hmm.
but he didn't want to. And but the things that he did were so concrete and they were so beneficial that everyone after them just basically did exactly what he did. And I think it was important to have him specifically
Hmm.
as the first president because all the things that he did, they were so on point that we needed them at that time, and we still need them now. But also another thing that I find interesting is during I think it was his last speech that he was giving, his farewell speech or whatever. If you actually go back and read that, it's some good stuff in there, stuff that
Hmm.
we need to listen to today.
Yeah.
So just go ahead and go read that. And I would love to read it now, but we don't have time for that.
It's pretty
But
long. I
please
read
go
it for
read it. It
school.
is
Yes,
it's so good.
it is very
Yeah,
good.
he's just basically just saying stay away from foreign people. Just work on our own country and don't mess around with other everyone else's country and their messes.
Hmm.
It's not our responsibility to do. And what have we done? We're funding the war in Ukraine. We're fighting Israel, and I believe we should fight for Israel. But I'm just saying we're funding the whole world basically. And what are we getting for it? Absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
And I believe this is where Trump also believes he's like put America first. All these
Hmm.
other suckers can wait. This is America. We are the
Yeah.
American people. We're going to serve our people. The other people can wait. They can get out of here.
Yeah.
Anyways,
Yeah. So, all right. George Washington gets done with his presidency, so guess he goes back to his farm and lives happily ever after. What it sounds like.
well, pretty much his plan was to go back to Mount Vernon and make it just as prosperous as it was before. Obviously, he did all these things. But one night before going to bed, he was checking on everything, but it was raining and he was riding his horse. But he was basically just checking his plantation out, making sure everything's fine. And the next morning, he wakes up with a cold, and then the cold develops into an infection, which is in his throat. And unfortunately, he dies at the age of 67. Which, honestly, though, at that time, 67 wasn't a bad
I was
age
gonna
to die
say
at.
it's probably not bad.
Um,
Wasn't
because
exactly
yeah, a lot of
easy to
people
live
wouldn't
back
die
then.
of. You're right. They didn't have all these medicines and vaccines and all this other stuff. But so yeah, that's
Yeah,
basically life of George Washington.
cool. So at the end of the day, I have two questions here. Number one, what can we learn from a biblical perspective from George Washington's life? And then number two, as young Americans, what are some key takeaways that we should take away to apply to the way we live and what we do in our country?
So I mean, obviously, the first thing that we see with George Washington was he was very smart or very wise, but he knew how to use that wisdom, and he was always looking out for the betterment of his own people. I mean, just others in general, but specifically Americans, obviously. But he was very, very wise. I believe that's how he won the war, obviously, because he could strategize, he could use his resources, he knew where to put stuff, soldiers and all this stuff. He was very wise and he knew how to use it, and um, he had common sense. And I believe
Hmm.
that is something that there's not much of today.
Hmm.
But he actually cared for the American people. Um, so basically, from a biblical perspective, he was wise, and that verse comes to my mind. Be as wise as serpents, but as harmless as doves. Um, just be wise
Hmm.
and as wise as you can be, because in the long run, it's going to help you out. And you could be in a sticky situation, but if you know how to do certain things, you can weasel your way out of bad situations. But so that's basically from a biblical perspective. Um, as young America, we just look at the life of him and how dedicated he was in everything that he did. And I think that should be one of the key things that we take away. Um, just in everything that he did, he gave it his all, and he succeeded for it. And you look at the war, obviously, and there were some battles that he lost, but yet he recovered from them, and he still won the war. He may have lost the battle, but he won the war. And that's just going to be part of life. You're not going to win everything. There's going to be chances that you take, and you're going to fail, but you get back from them and you get it again and you figure out how to get it to work. So I guess just being dedicated to everything that you're doing, no matter what it is, and in every little task, to put your whole heart into it and just do your best. Um,
Yeah,
so that's what I
that's good.
think.
Yeah. So at the end of the day, then wisdom, getting wisdom, and having dedication, basically, is what it sounds like
Hmm.
are our key takeaways,
Pretty
which I
much.
think, you know, important, obviously, and something that lacks, unfortunately. So, yeah,
Hmm.
if you're listening, take it to heart.
And yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, another thing is he was very well educated, like I was saying, but that's the problem that we have in America is that no one knows exactly what they're talking about. They're just following the crowd and chanting this and chanting that. In reality, they have no idea what they're talking about. They're just a bunch of blind fools leading blind fools, And it sounds harsh, but it's the honest truth. And we need to come to that honest truth and come to the realization that we don't know what we're doing. We don't know the facts. We don't know any specifics about anything. We just follow the crowd or follow what someone else says because it sounds good. It's like, dude, go do your homework, go do your research and figure out what's true and what God would be pleased with. But anyways, that's
Right.
a
Yeah.
side note.
Yep. All right. Well, thank you everybody for listening. Be sure to take these lessons to heart, and we will be back in the next couple of weeks with another character and more lessons for your life.